I was reading the book of Revelations this morning, and it got me thinking a lot about numbers. There's a lot of numbers inside of that book, so I wanted to do a video about that. I wanted to talk about why numbers matter so much in Revelation. Like, have you ever noticed how obsessed the book of Revelation is with numbers? 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, 7 spirits, 12 tribes, 12 apostles, 144,000 people, 1,000 years. And then, of course, at first, these numbers, they could seem kind of random, but they're not, obviously. John is using numbers almost as a language. And if you understand what those numbers meant to the people of his time, Revelation starts to look a little different. Now, when we say numerology, we have to be very careful because John wasn't practicing modern numerology where someone calculates your birthday and assigns you a personality or destiny. John's numbers are primarily biblical symbolism, and he is drawing on patterns that appear throughout Scripture. And one of the most important numbers is 7. 7 appears throughout the Revelation because in the biblical world, 7 was strongly associated with completeness and fullness. Think about Genesis. God creates for 6 days, and then on the 7th day, the work is completed. So when John gives us 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls, he's not necessarily saying here are 7 completely unrelated things. He's communicating a sense of fullness and completion. 7 churches can represent the complete church. 7 seals represents the complete unfolding of God's plan. 7 trumpets announce the complete progression of judgment. 7 bowls represent the completion of God's wrath. John is repeatedly using 7 to tell his audience, this is complete, this is God's full plan unfolding. Then we come to 12. 12 has a different association. 12 is strongly connected to God's covenant people. There were 12 tribes of Israel, and Jesus chose 12 apostles. And when Revelation uses 12, John's audience would naturally think God's people. Now look at something fascinating. John describes 144,000. Where does that number come from? You got to take 12, you multiply it by 12, that's 144, then multiply it by 1,000, you get 144,000. So 144,000 is not just a strange number that John pulled out of nowhere. It is constructed out of symbolic numbers. 12 represents God's people. 12 times 12 intensifies that symbolism. And 1,000 is frequently used in Scripture to communicate an enormous, complete, or extensive quantity. So 144,000 is loaded with symbolism. It's essentially saying the complete people of God multiplied and brought to fulfillment. Then we encounter another number, 1,000. This is particularly interesting because modern readers often want to treat every number as if it were a precise mathematical measurement, but biblical writers didn't always use it that way. 1,000 can communicate an enormous quantity of a complete period. That's why the 1,000 years in Revelation 20 has generated so much debate. Is John giving us a literal chronological measurement, or is he using symbolic language to communicate completeness? Christians have disagreed about that for centuries. And then we arrive at the number everybody remembers, the 666. This one obviously hits a little different. John doesn't represent a 666 as a positive symbol of completion. He calls it the number associated with the beast. And this is where something called gematria becomes important. In the ancient world, letters could also have numerical values. That meant a person's name could potentially be converted into a number. So when John says essentially, let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, he's giving his readers a clue. He's telling them to calculate it. So that strongly suggests that the number is connected to a name or identity. And 666 may have been understood by John's original audience as a coded reference to a particular ruler. One famous interpretation connects 666 with Nero Caesar when his name is transliterated into Hebrew letters and their names values together. So whether that completely solves the mystery is still debated, but it demonstrates something extremely important, that John's original readers lived in a world where numbers could carry meaning beyond mathematics, and numbers could function almost like codes. And that brings us to a number that people today often ask about, 44. If you've ever encountered modern numerology, you may have heard 44 described as a powerful number associated with stability, foundations, discipline, ambition, or building something that lasts. But here's where we have to separate modern numerology from revelation. John never gives 44 the kind of symbolic role that he gives 7, 12, or 1000, or 666. There is no clear biblical system in Revelation where 44 means this specific thing. So if someone tells you that John specifically used 44 to symbolize this particular spiritual meaning that's going beyond what the text actually gives us, and that's an important distinction, because Revelation isn't just a book filled with random mystical numbers. John is communicating through a symbolic system that his audience would have recognized at the time. So 7 means completeness, 12 points towards God's covenant people, 12 multiplied by 12 and then by 1,000 produces 144,000, a number saturated with covenant symbolism. And 1,000 can communicate vastness or completeness. And of course, 666 functions as a ominous identifying number connected to the beast. So the numbers are not decorations. They are part of a very important message. And in fact, you could almost think of Revelation as having multiple layers. You know, John gives you images, he gives you symbols, he gives you Old Testament references, and he gives you numbers. And all of these pieces are working together, and that's why Revelation becomes much more understandable when you stop asking only, what does this number literally equal? And you need to start asking things like, what would this number have meant to John and to the people who first read it? Because John wasn't simply writing mathematics, obviously. He was writing symbolism. And once you start seeing that, you realize something pretty fascinating, and that is, in Revelation, the numbers themselves are telling part of the story.